Good afternoon or evening, depending where you're joining us from, and welcome to this FR and Focus webinar support for June 2024 exams. My name is Hazel McLucas and I am an Education Partners Support Manager at ACCA. As the title of this webinar suggests, the Manage Your Time and Master Your Technique, our session today is designed to support you with financial reporting exam, and our expert tutor, Cara Barrett, will share insights to help you with your June 2024 exam preparation. The webinar will focus on how to deal with objective questions or constructive response questions, lessons on time management, the importance of question practice using ACCA's practice platform, and best practice during the final 3 weeks before exams. Towards the end, we'll also answer some common but very important questions from students that have been asked in advance, and if time permits, we'll also pick some live questions as well. Before I hand over to Cara, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items just quickly. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a number of buttons you can use. Firstly, there's the help icon on the left, which provides resources and information that will help you resolve any technical issues you might have. There are icons for both the slides and the media player. You'll need both of these during the webinar, so make sure you've selected them. There's an attendee chat that you can use to engage with fellow webinar attendees, but you should not share any personal information in that chat. And also we have our resource list. If you click on that, you'll be able to access resources relevant to today's webinars that will include some direct links. You can rearrange your screen to suit and resize the windows if you want to. And if at any point you can't hear what we're saying or see the visuals, then please refresh your browser. Registering for this webinar means that you'll be sent an email tomorrow with details on how you can listen to it again. So if you miss something that's said or you have any technical issues, don't worry, you'll be able to access the recording. I'm going to hand over to Cara in a moment, and I'll be back with you towards the end of the session. And if you'd like to ask ACCA or Cara a question, then please post them in the Q&A section. Please note we can't guarantee responding to everyone directly, either verbally or in the web chat, but we hope that the questions that we share today will be helpful for everyone. So handing over to you, Cara.
Thank you very much indeed. And hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar. Let's start by introducing me. My name is Cara Barrett. I have been involved with people like yourselves, teaching students, but also teaching tutors, FR and reporting stream topics for quite a long time now, actually coming up for 23, 24 years, so over 20 years. I also do lots of work with accountancy institutes, including ACCA throughout the world, to develop their qualifications and their materials. So that's a little bit of background on me. What are we covering today? I know that Hazel has run through it, but just to reiterate, I am going to be talking to you first of all about how to answer questions. And of course, in FR, we have OTQs, objective test questions, and those longer section C constructed response questions. So I'll pick up on both of those. We then have a session, what to do if your time management goes wrong. It tends to go wrong, leaving you with section C questions to deal with. So I have a little video to show you about how you can grab easy marks in those section C questions. We're then going to talk about how useful that practice platform is. And again, I have a very short video in which I will take you into the practice platform and show you why you should use that to do your practice before your exam. Then I'll just run through what you should be doing between now and your actual real exam, and then it's on to the Q&As. Now, throughout this entire webinar, if you can type your Q&As into the Q&A box, what that means is that when I set those short videos that I mentioned, I can dip into the background and I can start answering some of them. And I'll answer as many as I can, probably not all of them, but as many as I can. And I can also just pick up on the common themes so that I can share those with you at the end of today's session. We also have an ACCA support team in the background working on Q&As. So, do keep them coming. Absolutely anything that you want to know. This is your session. Anyway, let's start with how to answer questions. And here I have got some top tips, some really important top tips for you to follow. So the first of those top tips are all going to be to do with objective test questions. So we're talking about section A and section B of your financial reporting exam. And rule number 1 is vitally important, not only in FR, but in every single exam that you do at ACCA, and that is to allocate your time and stick to it. Really stick to it. So we know this is a 3-hour exam. We know that we have 100 marks to get through in an ideal world, and that means there's 1.8 minutes per mark. So section A, the OTQs, we are looking at 54 minutes. Section B is made up of 3 mini case studies of 5 questions each. That is 18 minutes per mini case. And as I say, stick to it. When you start section A, set the clock, look at the clock, see what time plus 54 minutes is, and when you get there, stop and move on. That is vitally important, even if you have not quite finished. Do the same for section B for each mini case you deal with. So that's my first rule. What's my second rule for objective test questions? Well, the second one, and this again applies to the entire exam really, but do what you find easiest first. We know that some of those OTQs are trickier. Maybe they're very number crunchy. Maybe they're on a topic that actually you really don't like. Well, in that case, skip over it. You can come back to it later if you've got time, but it makes a lot of sense to deal with the questions that you can do, that you can feel confident about first. And to help you do that, help you take that approach in the practice platform, and I'll show you this later anyway in the video, but we have this great tool, which is a navigator to help you move around the questions. And as you can see at the bottom of the screen there, it highlights which questions you've done and which questions you haven't done so that you can go back. Rule number 3, RTQ. You might have heard that a lot. RTQ means read the question. Massively important. Let me give you a couple of examples of why. There's the first one. Your requirement might say, which 2 of the following would you select? Now, if you haven't read that, if you only select one of the options in an OTQ when you are supposed to select 2, you cannot get any marks at all. OTQs are all or nothing. In other words, you get both marks or you get no marks. So selecting one item doesn't mean you get 1 mark if it's correct. It means you get 0 marks. So read that really carefully. Some of the OTQs require you to do a calculation and actually type the number into a box rather than choose a pre-selected number, A, B, C, or D. So there's an example just flashed up. The important thing to see there is the end of that sentence in brackets, in whole dollars. So that might mean that you need to round, depending on the question, of course. It might mean, if you've done a calculation in thousands, that you need to remember to add 000. You might have come to an answer of 5, but actually it's 5,000, so you have to add the zeros. That's really important because OTQs are marked by a computer, not by a person. And whilst a person could look at your answer and say, actually, do you know what? They're right, they just forgot the zeros. Computer can't. So RTQ, read the question. What's my next tip? For OTQs, never leave an answer blank. And that really applies to the MCQs. MCQ, a multiple choice question. So choose one of the following 4 options. Even if you have no time left, or even if you really haven't got a clue where to start with a question, which hopefully won't be the case, but you still have a 25% chance of guessing that answer correctly. So why would you not take that chance? So never leave an answer blank would be my 4th and final rule really for OTQs. What about those longer questions, those section C questions? And these ones are going to be really important, in particular for those of you who are sitting a skills paper for the first time. So you're seeing these longer questions for the first time. Well, with constructed response questions, Again, you'll be bored of hearing this, I'm sure, but rule number 1 is allocate time and stick to it. You have two 20-mark questions. That is 36 minutes per question. Spend your 36 minutes, then stop and move on. Your constructed response questions might have a part A and a part B. Let's say, for argument's sake, 10 marks, 10 marks. In that case, split your minutes across those requirements. And again, stick to it. Why do I keep harping on about timing and sticking to timing? Why is that so important? Well, it's because all questions have easy marks. And the easy marks are the ones that you tend to get at the very start of the question. And actually, often those easier marks will take you to a pass. So it would be silly to continue trying to get the harder marks when you've run out of time, when you could actually move on to a new question and get more easy marks. That's why it's so important. Now, constructed response questions come in two different forms. The two questions, obviously, one will be some form of accounts preparation question. It might be preparing accounts for a single entity or for a group. One will be an analysis interpretation question. Again, it might be analyzing a single company or analyzing a group's financial statements or part of them. So approaches for both of those. In terms of accounts preparation, and it doesn't matter whether it's for a single company or a consolidation preparation, the kind of format, I suppose, that you should follow, the path you should follow, is to first of all get your pro forma down in the constructed response area, so in the spreadsheet area. That's going to require you to learn those pro formas before you go to the exam. Make sure that you can just get them immediately, get them in your head immediately, get them on paper immediately or on screen immediately, and then you can move on to the next stage, because this is where you start grabbing marks. Insert balances from the question. Now, it depends which type of question you're looking at as to what those balances are. If you're dealing with a single company accounts preparation question, you will be given a trial balance, or part of, within the stem of the question. So you can transfer those amounts in the trial balance into your pro formas, and those are some easy half marks. If you're doing consolidation, you will be given the parent and subsidiary separate financial statements. You can transfer those into your answer pro forma with an addition between them, so P plus S in effect. And again, you can get some easy half marks. Once you've done that, think about that list of adjustments that we tend to see. So under the trial balance, a list of complications, adjustments, whatever you want to call them, or under the parent and the subsidiary separate financial statements, a similar kind of list of adjustments. So look at those adjustments and start feeding them into your solution, possibly with a working. A rule that we've already talked about applies there. Deal with the easiest first. Very often you'll find it's the last adjustment listed. And then as a very, very final step, if you have time, close those financial statements off, get the closing balances in effect. So that's an approach to an accounts preparation question. What about everybody's favorite type of question? Analysis and interpretation. Don't worry, I know it's not everybody's favorite type of question. So it's really important to have a good approach. The first thing I would do, having read the requirement and understanding what is wanted, so it might be comment on position and performance, for example, is I would create a skeleton plan for my answer with some headings that I'm going to flesh out. So it might be a heading for position, heading for performance. I would always put in place a heading for a conclusion, because I know that marking schemes will tend to give a mark for a conclusion, so I don't want to forget it. When you've got that skeleton plan in place, just take a step back and think, how many points do I want to write under each of those headings? So generally speaking, a point per good mark. So you might think, I'm going to write 5 things on position, I'm going to write 5 things on performance, and I'm going to spare some marks for calculating ratios. Think about what you want to do, how you want to allocate your time and your marks. Then we'll go on to the next slide. Then start fleshing out, start writing. So write one good point per mark you have allocated. And it's really nice for a marker to see that as very clear separate points, so with white space in between. And when you are writing the marks, do not waffle, do not write too many words, keep it as succinct as possible. State a fact. It might be something like the gross profit margin has increased from 50% to 60%, and then explain why that has happened. Preferably, or really should be referencing here, the information that you've been given in the scenario. And sometimes you don't get massive amounts of information, but use what you're given. So it might be there's a new product, for example. If you can also link the fact to something else that's going on in the financial statements. So for example, gross profit margin has increased, but actually revenue's down. So it looks as though we might have alienated customers. You can also think about what might happen in the future, again, using clues from the scenario. So state the fact, gross profit margin has gone from 50% to 60%. What might happen in the future? Well, actually, I don't think this is going to be sustainable. That kind of thing. Finally, and I've said this is important, conclude. You will get a mark for that, as long as you reflect what you have written. That's really important. And it doesn't matter too much what you've written, as long as it is a reflection of what you've written. So some top tips there, some rules really for approaching both of our types of questions. What we're going to do now is move on to this next section, and we will see really those tips I've given you for constructed response questions coming through in the videos that I am about to hit play on. So this section is time management and what if it all goes horribly wrong? I've said stick to time, but what if you lose your way? And as I've said, that tends to mean that you're left with section C questions to do. So it's really important to use the technique I've just talked about really wisely to grab those marks. So this video is just going to show you how you would do that. And whilst you watch it, I'm going to dip into the background and I'm going to start looking at some of those questions that I can see are flying into my inbox. So I'll be back with you in about 10 minutes. Here we go. If you're running short of time and you are left with an accounts preparation question to do, the key thing is to grab as many easy marks as you possibly can. Now, in an accounts prep question, whether it's a consolidation or a single company set of accounts that you're preparing, the first thing you have to do is set up the pro forma. And you can't get away from that. That in itself is not going to score you any marks, but you can't get away from doing it. So the key thing for you is to do it as quickly as possible, and that probably means abbreviations. So I'm just using a sample question here, which requires the preparation of a statement of profit or loss and OCI, a preparation of a SOCI, statement of changes in equity, and then there's also a tag-on requirement, which is earnings per share. But in terms of the actual accounts preparation, you can see, if I just scroll down there, I have drawn up a SOCI and a SPLOCI with lots of abbreviations in them. I'm keeping it as quick as possible, so things like COS for cost of sales. I have also, instead of typing out the title, statement of profit or loss, I have actually used my requirement. I have copied and pasted it to save myself a bit more time. So far that's no marks. So I need to motor through that. When I'm going to start getting the marks in a question like this is for taking the raw data from the question and feeding it into the relevant part of my pro forma. So something like the revenue figure here. So if I just quickly, into a bracketed working, add that number 3765505, and then I would do exactly the same for cost of sales, distribution costs, admin expenses, other income, and then lower down here, the tax charge. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces of raw data that I've put into my pro forma. I haven't yet made any adjustments to them, but in most FR marking schemes, you are actually going to get half a mark for each one of those numbers. So bearing in mind that we are looking to pass this question for 10 marks in our abbreviated period of time. Actually, by transferring some of these trial balance figures over, we're looking at getting something like probably 3 marks. So that's a really good head start. Of course, the same goes for the SOCI. We can move over the share capital, the share premium, the reval surplus and the retained earnings figures brought forward. Now, this is obviously a single company accounts preparation question. If you have a consolidation to do, the same sort of thing applies. If you transfer across parents' figures plus the subsidiaries' figures in bracketed workings, you're usually looking at getting probably half a mark for each one of those. Now, the markers do give you marks in this format of bracketed workings. Even though you've not got a final revenue figure, for example, you get marks for each component element of the calculation. So just make sure you lay it out with that raw data and you can access those marks. Once you've done that, look at the extra information that's given, quick scan down. Now look for items that you can deal with quite easily and quite quickly. And very often those actually come at the end. Very often they are the last points. We often get a very meaty, detailed point up at the top. It is entirely up to you though. If you're running low on time, you're not going to be able to deal with every single one of these information pieces. So do not try to. Try to deal with the quicker ones, as I say. So, for example, here, point number 7 is the declaration of a final ordinary dividend, and we're told the price per share. A little bit higher up, we're told the number of shares. So I might just go straight to my SOCI and I might add in a dividend there and calculate it and pop it into retained earnings. So a quick calculation, and that's going to be another easy mark. So that has to be your approach, to grab the easy marks. Now, in a question such as this, there are generally no marks for, let's call it, finishing off the accounts. So for getting a final figure in each line item. However, because we're doing a statement of profit or loss and we're doing a SOCI, it follows that the profit for the year that comes from your SPL is going to feed into retained earnings, and of course any OCI would feed in to the relevant reserves as well. Now, generally speaking, here you will get what's called an OFR mark, an own figure rule mark, for taking whatever figure you have come to at the bottom of your statement of profit or loss there and transferring it down into the SOCI, into the other place it should be. So even if you know you have not got a complete statement of profit or loss, you have not dealt with every adjustment, if you can do that little bit of finishing off, that little bit of feeding through, that will access you half a mark or a mark, which is an own figure rule mark. Equally, if you can then go on to deal with part C, which is to restate basic EPS, using your revised profit figure, even though you know it's not complete because you have not dealt with every single one of these items, that's fine. Again, you'll get own figure rule marks. So that's your route in an accounts preparation question when you've run out of time. Pro forma down as quickly as possible. Easy marks for transferring raw data from the question across, so from the trial balance, from the separate company financial statements, and then deal with 2, maybe 3 of the adjustments that you feel you can deal with relatively quickly, and if relevant, get a closing figure just to carry across. So what should you do in an analysis question if you are tight for time? Well, typically an analysis question will be like the one on the screen here. You'll be asked to calculate some ratios. You'll be asked to then discuss the results, in this case, position and performance. Now, in terms of the ratios, in this question, you were given a grid and it showed that there were, I think it was 7 ratios to calculate. Now, some of those ratios, you might not remember how to calculate them, or you might actually not remember what they mean, what you could say about them. Now, given that you are tight for time and you know you will not be accessing 20 marks, you need to aim for 10 marks. it makes a lot of sense to go for the ratios that you know how to calculate and you know what they mean. So if, as is the case here, you have a few to calculate, don't be afraid to miss maybe 2 of them out. Concentrate as ever on what you find easiest. So I, for example, have gone straight in at gross profit margin. I would have done operating profit margin as well as an easier ratio, and I would have done receivables collection period. Makes sense to do gearing because we are told how it is calculated. The other ones, whatever works for you really. When you are calculating a ratio, please do show the workings there, because that is a way of grabbing easy marks, just in case you do not get the percentage right or the actual output right, possibly because of calculator error, or if you've got one of the input numbers correct but one of them wrong, you will get the wrong figure coming out, obviously. But if you show your working, you can access some marks there, so please show your workings. Once you've done the ratios that you intend to calculate, obviously as quickly as possible, it's time to write something about them. And as I've already suggested, first thing to do here is just get yourself a skeleton in place. Don't feel tempted because you are short on time to just launch into writing, because that is the way that you will end up with a bit of a mess of words really on a sheet, possibly not very coherent words, something that's very difficult for the marker to read, maybe something that doesn't answer the question. So make sure that you do stick to planning your answer with a skeleton. So here they want a discussion on performance position. We know we've got some ratios we've been asked to calculate, even if you've not calculated them all. So it would make sense to get a skeleton down with a heading for performance, a heading for position, and the relevant ratios tucked under each of those as bullet points ready to populate. Also, don't forget, add your conclusion. As long as you write something there that reflects what you have written above, you will get that mark, and that's an easy mark. Once you've got your skeleton, pick what you want to write about first. So what do you feel most comfortable with? So it might be gross profit margin, for example, and just go back to that basic rule of state of fact. In this case, Treats gross profit margin is lower than the industry, and then explain it, but do make sure you explain it by reference to the scenario. So here we're told that Treats sells to supermarkets, unlike other companies in the industry. So your job is to get down as succinctly as possible, in as few words as possible, the fact that these supermarket customers are likely to use their power to push prices down and squeeze Treats margins. So it's not the first sentence there that will score you your mark, it is the second sentence that will score you your mark. So it's your job to get as many of these very short, sharp points down as you possibly can in your limited time left. If you feel you have something else to say, of course, write an extra point under a particular heading. In this case, it came to me that if Treat sells to supermarkets, then chances are, even though their margin's depressed, they will have more revenue, and actually they might have contracts for revenue in future years, so guaranteed revenue, which their competitors will not have. So something like that is going to score you an extra mark. Once you've written as many points as you can in the time, just make sure you leave a couple of minutes at the end before you run out of time, and just move down to that conclusion and just get what you can get down. And as I say, as long as it reflects what you've written, you will score a mark. So that's your way to access easy marks in a limited period in an analysis question. Calculate the ratios that you feel comfortable with, that you can calculate quickly. Get down a skeleton answer, and then flesh out the headings in that skeleton answer in the order that suits you. And when you have a couple of minutes left, stop and get a conclusion down. Okay, so I hope you found that useful in terms of really putting into practice what I had said in the previous session. One question has come in that I just want to pick up on before I move on, because it's relevant to what you've just watched, and that is in relation to the analysis question. Are we given a formula sheet for the ratios? No, I'm afraid you are not given a formula sheet. So you do have to learn those ratios, how they're calculated, but of course, really importantly, what they actually mean, because that's what feeds into the analysis. So sorry if that is bad news. Our next little section anyway is on question practice, and here we're going to home in on that really important practice platform, using software to do your exam. So here I just want to start off with a quick poll question. There you go. Do you practice questions now on the practice platform? Yes, no, or sometimes. So if you would be kind enough to tick the one that applies to you, that would be marvellous, just so I have a feel for where we are in terms of practice platform use. So off you go. I've got some answers coming in already, so I'll just give it a minute so that you can all have a chance to vote. Here they come. Marvellous. Thank you, everybody who has voted. And if you haven't yet, please hit one of those options. Perfect. I think that's just about the majority of you have now voted. So should we have a look? Should we have a look at the results, see what everyone does? There we go. So the biggest vote there is for yes, which is absolutely fantastic news. 25% of you don't, and yeah, but the remainder of you sometimes do and sometimes don't. And I do understand that it's not always practical to use the practice platform. For example, if you are just trying to have a quick go at some practice questions and maybe there's no internet available, or you haven't got a computer with you, or you're on the move, you're on public transport, whatever it happens to be. So I do understand you can't always use it, but the more you use it, the better. And even if you haven't been into the practice platform, can I urge you to do that, please, before your real exam, because there's plenty that you can pick up and learn, and that's all going to make it much easier for you when you go into your real exam. I often use the analogy of cooking a meal in a kitchen, and if it's your kitchen and you know where everything is, it's quite easy to cook that meal. Whereas if you've gone into a new kitchen that you've never been in before, you have no idea where the saucepans are kept, where the plates are kept, you don't know how the oven works, and so on. Same sort of thing here. The more you know how the software works, the more comfortable you're going to be come exam day. So here comes the second short video. This one's a little bit shorter, just to point out some of the merits of the practice platform and how you can use it usefully before you go into your exam. So here we go. So why should you use the practice platform in the run-up to your FR exam? Well, I've got 5 reasons why you should. And the first of those reasons is on the screen right now. When you go into the practice platform and you select the exam that you'd like to have a go at, the first thing that you land on is an introduction page, and that is followed, if I click on, by a series of instructions pages. And in those pages, you can see there's quite a lot of instructions. You are told how the practice platform works and what it can do, what its abilities are. And it's really, really important that you understand those and that you can work with them before you go into your real exam. So those instructions are really vital. They tell you lots and lots of information. You can see highlighting, the calculator function, workings, scratchpad function, all sorts of things. I won't go through them all. The second reason why you should be using the practice platform is because if I just move forward and I actually start the exam there, you want to be able to get used to navigating around the exam. So you can see here that you have all of the questions in the exam split into sections, and it's really, really useful for you to be able to jump to the question that you want to start with. So get used to using this navigator really to jump around to questions that you haven't had a go at yet. So really, really useful to be able to do that very, very quickly. Also really, really useful, you can see I'm jumping randomly, to be able to use this status update to spot what you've completed, what you've not completed, and what actually you've not even had a go at yet. My third reason for using the practice platform in the run-up to your exam is that you don't only want to learn about what the practice platform, the exam software, can do by reading about it, but you want to practice. So things like, for example, the highlight function here, knowing how that works so that you can use it to your advantage, or the strike through function, being able to say, well, I've dealt with that particular point, so I'll just strike through, I'll get rid of it. Being able to bring up the scratch pad and use that, but not only being able to bring up that scratch pad and use it, but knowing things like when you move on to the next question, if you bring up the scratch pad again, what you'd written on it is still there. So you don't lose your content, and that makes it quite a useful tool, for example, for writing down your timings so you can constantly keep an eye on them. So reason number 3, get used to all of these functions, all of the abilities of the practice platform. You can see I've popped up a calculator there. My fourth reason for using the practice platform is so that you can get used to producing constructed response answers in this word processing document, as you can see, completely blank. But knowing that you can, and also practicing copying and pasting requirements into that space so that you're in effect showing your marker, you are signposting your marker through your work. Also understanding what you can and can't do. You can see there are some functionality buttons here for this word processing document. However, they are not the same as ones that you might be used to in word processing software that you use on a day-to-day basis. So you need to get used to what you can do, but also what you can't do. It's also really useful to practice exam questions that you have to actually type the answers to, because on a day-to-day basis, when you're revising, when you're practicing questions, you might not produce answers in a word processing document. You might often just write them down on a piece of paper. So you need to be able to type efficiently into this constructed response area, but also use it to your advantage by, for example, creating skeleton answers that you then go back and flesh out. Reason number 5 to use the practice platform, if I just move on to the other constructed response, section C question, you can see that we have a spreadsheet function, a spreadsheet area there to write your answer in. And again, reason number 5 is to get used to using that to produce your answer. So obviously, if you're used to using pen and paper, this is very different. You're very constrained here by the grid outlines, but also you need to know, for example, if I just type in a couple of numbers, if you're doing consolidation, this might be useful. You need to know that you can use the functionality of the spreadsheet to actually do calculations for you. So getting used to that functionality, getting used to what the spreadsheet again can and cannot do is really useful. So on a day-to-day basis in a spreadsheet, you might use, for example, a sum total button. You will see here, however, that there is no sum total button. So you have to find different ways of doing that. Equally, in a spreadsheet that you might use on a day-to-day basis, you can insert extra rows and columns. You cannot do that in this spreadsheet. And therefore, you have to get used to alternative ways of dealing with the issue. So say, for example, I need an extra line between rows 3 and 4. I can't insert one, but what I can do is I can cut out what's below and just paste it a little bit lower down. But that's a different approach from that you might use every day. So you need to get used to these slight differences. So 5 reasons in summary to use the practice platform. First of all, so that you can read the instructions, you know what it's capable of. Secondly, so you can get used to navigating around the exam so that you can do it in the order that you want to do it, that works for you on the day. Thirdly, you've read about the functionality, but you need to practice that. You need it to become, in effect, second nature. Fourthly, you need to get used to producing answers in the word processing document. You need to know what that document is capable of and what it's not capable of. But also you need to be used to typing. And lastly, fifthly, you need to get used to this spreadsheet, its functionality, and how, again, you can use it to your advantage in your exam. Okay, so hopefully I have convinced those of you who don't use the practice platform or haven't used the practice platform to get in there and use it and feel your way around, try out the functionality. Really, really important, as I can't reiterate how important it is that you go into that exam feeling comfortable about the software. Just to pick up on a common theme coming through in the Q&As at the moment, and it refers to something that I've just mentioned, and that's abbreviations. So things like, can I use costs instead of cost of sales, or PPE, or NCI? Yes, absolutely fine. All of those are common abbreviations in financial reporting. If you are using your own abbreviation, let's call it, which is not common in financial reporting, and the marker might not understand what it is, then please write it out in full the first time that you use it. But those common abbreviations, absolutely fine. Okay, let's move on to our last actual topic that I'm going to talk to you about before we do Q's and A's, and that's what you should do now. So we're obviously getting very close to your real exam now. So what's important? What's important in terms of what you should be doing? Well, the three things that you need to be on top of now, really, or getting on top of, are first of all the technical content. Secondly, the exam software, and thirdly, exam technique. So far today, I have talked to you, obviously just now, about that exam software. I have talked to you a little bit earlier about exam technique and how you should approach different types of questions. So let's just talk about that technical content now. And that's something that, again, I've got a few questions coming in saying, oh, there's a lot of it. And of course, there is a lot of it in FR, but there's a lot of it. What should I do? How can I get on top of it? So here are some ideas. So first of all, revision summaries. I do not want you to spend your entire revision time writing notes. That will not help you. You must practice. However, having some revision summaries is actually a really useful thing, some revision notes. So it might be that you take a sheet of, let's say, A4 paper and say, I'm going to write the important stuff about IFRS 15 revenue on here. And you might write it, you might use a spider diagram, whatever works for you, but some sort of revision summary. You might be lucky enough to have access to pre-prepared revision summaries or revision cards from a content provider. You can use those instead. But some sort of revision summary is a great idea. Other things you can do to get on top of technical content. On the ACCA website, in the FR section, there is a link to technical articles by the examining team. Read those. Those are topics that the examiners feel it's worth talking to you about. And that's probably because at some point they're going to examine them, or they have examined them, or they would like you to know these specific points about those topics. So read the articles. Also read the examiner's reports on previous exams. They're also available on the FR section of the ACCA website. They will pinpoint some technical areas that have been examined that students have not done particularly well on, and the examiner in those reports just takes you through the technical topics and helps you to understand them, how they were examined, what the answer should have been. And lastly, you have this great facility that's available to you, and that's the ACCA Study Hub. Use it. You've got lots of content there. At this stage, you don't want to be going back to the full study texts in effect, but there are flashcards which will help you with your revision of technical content. So that's a few ideas, but I did say that it is really, really super important to practice. So let's just talk about the practicing that you should be doing now in the final run up to your exam. I would say when you are practicing questions or full exams, I know that there's not always time to do a full exam, so you might just take one question at a time, and that's fine, or one section A at a time. Do it to time. We've talked about timing. Do it under exam conditions, so don't have your books around you. Make sure nobody's going to interrupt you. Just get your head down and do the question. And do it on the software. Get used to that software as much as you possibly can. That's particularly true of those constructed response questions. When you've practiced, I mean, that's brilliant, but when you've practiced, don't just walk away. Mark what you have done. Debrief it. There's a marking guide available for every exam on the practice platform, so you can self-mark. If what you have attempted is an exam or a question from a real exam, a real past paper, look up the examiner's report on it, see what the examiner had to say about it. When you do that, you learn. That's part of the learning process. And as you learn extra bits of information from that process, feed them back into what we call your knowledge. So in effect, those revision summaries, just add notes. This is something extra I've learned from doing this question on this particular topic. And then keep practicing. So you end up with this continuous cycle, really, and you gradually improve. You learn from your mistakes. You learn from questions. So have a go at that. And in particular, there is a new mock. Have a go at the new pre-June 24 mock. And that brings me to my next poll question. And that is really what you know about this new mock. So here comes my question. The pre-June 2024 mock is released on a particular date. The debrief is released on a second particular date. Do you know when? There are the dates for you. Was the mock the 10th and the debriefs the 13th? Was the mock the 13th and the debriefs are released today? Was the mock released today and the debriefs are next week, or aren't you quite sure? Go ahead and vote. I can see some of you have voted already. Those answers are coming in. Just a couple of minutes to get a few more answers in, a few more votes in. It's completely anonymous. Don't be afraid to vote, will you? Okay, I think that's just about a majority of people have now voted. So let's see. So quite split here. The majority, or the bigger vote, I should say, has gone for the 13th, which was last Monday for the mock release date, and today for the debriefs release date. And you are absolutely correct. So both of those tools are now out there for you to use. Please, please have a go at that mock 2-time under exam conditions as a whole exam in one go, and then watch the debrief videos and learn. That's a really useful tool. Okay, let's now just move on to the last part of our time together today, and that is going to be the Q's and A's. And I have actually got some that were submitted before today that I'm going to run through first of all. So these are the questions asked in advance, and actually a lot of these mirror what's coming in on the Q&A facility right now. So first question, do I have to finish the entire exam to pass? And if so, how shall I manage my time to make sure I do finish? So we've talked about time management a lot today. And of course, doing the whole exam allows you potentially to access 100 marks, 50 of which you need to pass. I can definitely assure you that it is much easier to pass by attempting all 100 marks and getting half of them right than it is by only attempting half the marks, so only doing half the paper and getting every single thing right. So I would say you don't have to finish the entire exam, but you have to have a go at the whole exam to pass. That would be my top tip. Over and over, we get people saying, I've failed, marginal fail. Why have I just failed? And often you say, have you done every question? Did you attempt every question? No, I missed one of the section C questions out, I missed a requirement out, and actually that's why, that's the answer. You missed some easy marks. So please, yes, have a go at doing the whole question. How should I manage my time? This is where you've just got to be really strict with yourself. So stick to time, allocate your time, make a note of when you start and therefore when you've got to finish. That's really important practically. Write it down on the scratch pad in your exam and then stick to it. And just be harsh with yourself. Might not have finished, but I'm going to move on now. Next question. What areas of the syllabus will be covered in each part of the exam? So it's a massive syllabus, we know that. Lots of standards and other aspects like analysis, conceptual framework. We have already said that in section C, there will be some form of accounts preparation question. It might be a consolidation, it might be a single company. Now, that particular question could actually have any complications thrown into it, particularly if it's a single company question. So it might have a little bit of earnings per share, or it might have a little bit of financial instruments. If it's a consolidation question, just be aware there might also be, let's call it a non-groups aspect. So we have seen a consolidation question before that had a financial instruments adjustment in it. You will also have an analysis question. That then leaves section A and section B. And in section A and section B, the examiner will examine, or will view, I should say, the rest of the syllabus as fair game. So the examiner will try to cover as much of the syllabus as he possibly can in your exam. So please don't cherry pick. Please try and revise absolutely everything because anything could come up. Next up, which section of the exam should I start with, A, B, or C? Well, do you know what? This is really personal. Some of you will prefer to start with MCQs. Some of you will prefer to start with section C. And it's up to you. Do whatever makes you feel most confident first. Do the questions you feel most comfortable with first, because that will just ease you into the exam and give you that boost, really. So if you haven't quite decided which works for you, whilst you're doing your practice questions, your practice papers now, just mix it up a bit. Have a go at different approaches, see what you're happiest with. And then remember, in that software, you can use the navigator tool to jump around. Next question, and I think we've covered this in a video, and I've seen definitely questions coming in on the Q&As about this. Should I insert a calculation in a spreadsheet cell, or should I write it out manually? Well, in terms of presentation, in terms of helping your marker out, write it out manually. If you take something like a consolidation, for example, let's say cost of sales. So you've got the parent's cost of sales plus the sub's cost of sales, less intercompany cost of sales, and then maybe you've got an unrealized profit to adjust for as well. There might be other things to adjust for. Writing it out manually, A, it really helps your marker to see it, but B, it means you can actually add words. So for the unrealized profit, you can put the number and then put URP. So you're highlighting to the marker what this is. Now that's important because sometimes if the numbers are just in a cell and you have the wrong number, the marker thinks, I'm not sure I can give marks because I don't know what that is and I can't see it anywhere else. Say you've not done a working. Whereas if you've written what it is, you've written it's an ERP, you might get an own figure rule mark if you've got a working elsewhere. So I would always write out the calculation in brackets. That is not to say that you cannot also use the functionality of the spreadsheet to perform your calculations. You can do both, that's fine. And the last question that I have as a pre-prepared question, if I do the revision kit questions, is that enough to pass? How many times should I do them? Are the questions the same as those in the actual exam? Well, revision kit questions are great. They are generally drawn from past papers, often quite historic papers, but they've been updated. So they are exam style and what have you. However, as well as those revision kit questions, I would say, and better than the revision kit questions really, the practice platform questions, which are taken from recent past exams. Those are really important to practice. So if you only do revision kit and you don't do those past exam questions that are available on the practice platform, you're maybe just reducing slightly your ability to pass. So the more questions you can, different questions you can do, the better, but the more recent ones, even better. Are they the same as those in the actual exam? Well, no, we don't see duplicates of questions. We don't see questions coming up that have come up a few sittings ago, but the style will be the same. So that's where you can learn. That's what you can learn from. So having gone through all of those questions that were pre-prepared, shall we just dip into the ones that are coming in live and see if there's anything that I can help you out with? So I'm trying to pick the general questions that could be applicable to everybody. And I have had a question come in. In fact, I've just lost it. I was just trying to find it. Oh, no, it's actually gone. It was a question about spelling. I can't remember the exact wording, but do I need to get my spellings right? No, you don't. It's absolutely fine if you have typos, if you have spelling mistakes. I know typing can be difficult and some people aren't great at spelling. As long as your marker can understand what you are saying, you will not be marked negatively. You will not lose marks. So that's absolutely fine. How much content should be written for each ratio based on the marks? Well, I don't think it's quantity here that's important. I think it is quality. So some students are under the or think that they should write masses of volume and that's what's going to score them marks. And actually, that's not the case at all. The shorter, the sharper, the more succinct you can keep it, the better. So for each ratio, if you can, like I said earlier, state the fact, state what's happened to the ratio. So it's increased, it's decreased, or improved is even better, or got worse. So you're adding a sentiment there, but then explain why that is using the scenario. You've scored a mark. If all you do is write, it has increased, you cannot access a mark. So you have to take it that step further. So in terms of content, not masses, but make sure you get a meaty point down. Make sure you get enough down with the explanation. Let's just try and pick up some other things. Analysis and interpretation, how to lay out the ratio analysis workings in the space provided. So sometimes we do have in the word processor constructed response area, we have a grid there that's pre-prepared and you've got an empty box, let's call it, in that grid to do your calculations in. In terms of how you lay it out, it's not massively important. I wouldn't waste time writing, for example, gross profit divided by revenue times 100. I'd just go straight to the numbers. That was obviously a gross profit margin. Go straight to the numbers. Just write it out as you would do normally, as you type it into the calculator. So profit over revenue times 100. That's absolutely fine. If you don't put the times 100, it's also absolutely fine. We know, markers know how to make a percentage. Let's keep going. Is there a structure for conclusion for the section C analysis? No, there's not really a set structure at all, and it doesn't take more than a sentence or two just to really reflect what you have said. So if you've talked about position and performance, just a sentence saying the position of the company is strong or is weak because, and then a couple of points in terms of
Hi everyone. We seem to have lost Cara, unfortunately, but given that we are 2 minutes from closing, I think I'll just close off the session. So I'm hoping that you found today's session very useful, and I'd like to remind you all about the important resources that are updated in the resources session of the webinar. So there are things like the pre-June 24 mock exams and debrief
each
videos that
question is
Cara
completely
mentioned.
standalone. And
Sorry, Cara, we
therefore
lost you
you
for
can.
quite a while there.
Sorry. Oh, did you?
Yes, we
I've
did,
been talking to
unfortunately.
myself then.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm
So I'm
so
just going to close the
sorry.
session off. We only have a minute to go, so I'll just finish that off, but don't worry too much.
I'm sorry, everybody. Sorry, Hazel,
So as
go
I
on.
was saying, in the resources session, we have the pre-June 24 mocks and debrief support that Cara mentioned. There's examiner reports. There's the on-demand version of the March 24 FR in Focus, which was really useful. And there's an FR playlist on YouTube. Everyone who registered today for the webinar will be getting an email with details on how they can listen to it again. And finally, thank you to everyone for joining today, and thank you, Cara, for extending your support. And thank you to everyone in the back that has helped deliver the session successfully. We wish you all the best for your exams. Thank you.
Absolutely. Good luck.